Today we are going to be looking at responding to the unseen poem. First of all, I just want to say, do not be afraid of this one. Of all the questions on the paper, this one perhaps is the friendliest question. You might be asked about the attitudes or ideas you can see about childhood in the poem, or friendship, seasons, love, relationships, families, sisters. The topic is something quite simple and straightforward. So, what I am going to get you to do is to take a look at how some simple words in any poem can help to extend and develop an understanding that you have of the topic you've been asked to look at. One poem we're going to use is the poem called A Marriage, and the very first line is the one that we're going to talk about now. The question is asked, how are ideas of marriage presented in this poem? And the first line is, you are holding up a ceiling. Second line, with both arms. We've got some enjoyment going on there. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But let's just look. Simple words. Holding up. If you are holding up, you are supporting something. Let's extend that. If something requires, or someone requires support, then that thing or person is not as stable as it should be. Let's develop that a little further. This would suggest that if that phrase is a metaphor for marriage, that in marriage there may be problems that occur that will require some form of support from either party. If we look to the second line, with both arms, there is the idea of total commitment to what is happening, what needs to be done. Now, both arms, hands in poetry often represents action of some sort, proactive behavior, something that involves labor of some sort, engagement. That person has to be engaged in whatever is going on. So if we apply that to the idea of marriage, there is the idea that marriage requires people to be fully engaged in being a part of what is going on, but also a part of what needs fixing. I want to take you back to holding up, because we talked about support, and we extended and developed that. But actually, we could talk about the other ways of seeing that phrase, holding up. If you are holding up something, you are positioning something, or you are keeping something in place. Let's talk about the keeping something in place. To keep something in place means that you are attempting to try to stop it from falling. You are trying to stop it from being dislodged. If we develop that further, any attempt to try to stop something from being in a particular position or doing something requires effort. So marriage, if we are looking at this extended metaphor, requires effort on the part of the individuals to keep it in the way that they want it to be positioned, so that it stays as it should. And if we are thinking about this idea of positioning, it would indicate that marriage, in the eyes of some people, they require it to look, be, and feel a particular way. There is the idea about marriage that a person involved, or the people involved, will invest in how they want that marriage to look. Hence, the holding up. Now, if we look at the end of that line, we said we'd talk about enjambment. And remember, we've just only looked at a few words over 2 lines. But let's look at a poetic device here. Because with every poem, we're not just saying what is the poet showing or telling us, we're talking about how. So the idea of you are holding up a ceiling and the pause happens at that point. Now, a ceiling would indicate that there is a point at which something stops. A ceiling also indicates height of some sort, that there is almost like an aspiration if we are looking at a ceiling. And we pause at that point to recognize that the ceiling also represents that covering, that idea of the stability and security that protects anybody underneath from elements or from anything else outside. It encloses that ceiling, it covers, and it keeps the individuals underneath safe. So pausing at that point allows us to recognize all of the components of marriage that are so essential, that need to be there. But go back a few words, all of those components require support to put it there. So the enjambment helps us to understand what is so essential in this marriage. If we go to the second line, because enjambment, we always look at the last word on the first line, ceiling, and the first few words on the second line, with both arms. And I think for me, what's really important is a word that we might have overlooked, with. It is the idea of support reinforced with that word, but it's the idea of togetherness, the unity alongside. This doesn't happen by itself, this support, or this doesn't happen in a random fashion. It is the idea that it is only alongside the commitment with both arms that the marriage will look and be the way that people want it to be. Now, I'm not going to talk about the rest of the poem because obviously we only looked at 2 lines. But in a 24-mark question, it is the idea that you can pick through the poem and talk about the elements that refer to the topic they have given you to talk about. And I would always recommend beginning with evidence, just as I did. In the poem of marriage, the speaker begins with the statement, "You are holding up a ceiling," and then begin to deconstruct it, pull it apart, talk about the idea that comes through, talk about the method, the poetic device you see, the language device used, talk about the structure. It is at the beginning. If we are given this information at the beginning, this would indicate that this is by far the most important element of marriage, the idea of support, effort, commitment, unity. I hope this has been useful, but as always, do let me know if you want anything else covered.